Buenas tardes. Les invitamos a tomar sus asientos, ya que estamos a punto de reanudar las sesiones. Gracias.
¿Qué tal? Muy buenas tardes. Pues vamos a dar inicio al siguiente panel del quinto foro de la democracia latinoamericana, precisamente sobre las protestas sociales y el Internet. Nuestro moderador es el embajador Óscar Maurtúa, quien fue embajador de la OEA en México, muy amigo del Instituto Nacional Electoral del Colegio de México, y es un honor que sea nuestro...
He is a friend of INE, and it's a pleasure to have him as moderator. Thank you very much. Thank you all. We have the responsibility of having this sixth session, which is a pretty provoking session. The title is Social Demonstrations on Internet. What is the repercussion in democratization processes? Well, we all know what has happened. We know what has happened in the last decades, in the last 10 years. The cyberspace has expanded, and Twitters and wireless phones, all that has generated a revolution, a technological revolution, and under this technological revolution and globalization, all this has expanded across the planet. Why is it important? This is one of the questions that we have to answer. Does it contribute to democratization? Does it have an intrinsic value to strengthen the characteristics of a society that wants to live in democracy? Or does it have to do with a choice? An occasional movement. It is not a reflection of a current, and television commentators and political analysts will gather all this material. They will weigh it, and they will assimilate it, and then make an assessment. There are all these tweeters which are expressing this legislation hasn't been approved in Parliament. Public demonstrations or expression. It was a traditional way of expressing. And I said it before with my peers who are here with me in this panel. It was the expression of, in Peru there are 120 days of strikes, and every day we have demonstrations. Physicians who are asking for a wage increase. It is fair, because the state physicians make very little, but now the city got used to it. And it doesn't have an impact as we have an impact, or as we see an impact that we see in Twitter. So these are all the things that we could review. Here I have the parameters that I also would like you to please, I know you should be familiarized with them. And how technology has influenced in the rearticulation of social movements. Recent cases of demonstrations in the region, are those a real or massive phenomena, or is it being magnified by the use of new technologies? Social use of technology is a mechanism that makes the social organization more complex. What is the impact of this in the relationship between citizens and the state? Are we speaking about new voices, or is it the old topics presented from a new citizens' optics, impregnated by the globalization and the mass media? So with us we have Dr. José Luis Chicoma, journalist from Chile, Mónica González, the journalist and researcher from Mexico, Fernanda Somoano, Kevin Casas. He is a political secretary for the Organization of American States. Do we have Roberto Hill with us? I think he hasn't come yet. This is a team, and we're going to continue with the practice. We will continue with the model that we have had these days. I don't want to give the floor over to others without first thanking INE for the organization of this forum. It started 5 years ago, and 5 years is a long time. So I felt identified, and I was at that time serving Mexico, and I participated in all of them. And I am very happy to see that Manuel Carrillo Poblano was very kind to invite me to be the moderator of this event with these very special characteristics and these provoking characteristics and very stimulating sessions. So we're going to start with José Luis Chicoma. Thank you very much, Chancellor, Ambassador. My name is José Luis Chicoma. I am the director of a Mexican think path. It is a lab of public policies, and I am Peruvian, and I am the only one foreigner in the think tank. But I have in mind two well-known words by a Peruvian when making reference to the Mexican system. I do not speak about Laura Bozo. I would like to rather speak about Mario Vargas Llosa. He said the Mexican system was a perfect dictatorship. I know it is painful for some of you, but after 24 years, the system has changed significantly. But now we can speak about democracy. It is democracy with the feeling that we have had in recent weeks, failed democracy. And here I have something that I read in March this year. In Chimpalcingo, the prosecutor's office took the declaration of a survivor of a kidnapping case. He was kidnapped in May 2013. The demonstration was this expression was by a witness, by a person who was kidnapped, and his peers, 3 of his peers were assassinated. And the one who directly participated in that assassination was José Luis Abarca, the mayor that is now running away. He was a killer, he was a murderer. And this declaration, this statement happened there at the prosecutor's office, and it was just filed, and it was never processed. And the accusation against these charges had no effect with the Ministry of the Interior either at the federal level, and no effect with the governor, obviously. So yes, can we speak about a failed democracy? How come a murderer can be in government after more than a year later? And what now happened with these missing students? And what is the relationship of this and democracy? And I said it is a failed democracy, and it also has a lot to do with internet. We believe that because of supervision that we can have in the social media, governments are going to be more transparent and more efficient. But there are many problems with this. Internet and Twitter and Facebook, those could be great means to organize demonstrations, but this is it. That is the organization of demonstrations, but that's it. Those are very important. Yesterday, there were demonstrations in more than 20 states in Mexico City, and that's very important for the authorities to do something on what is happening in Iguala. Another demonstration, the movement I Am 132, and the very quick growth and expansion was all because of the social media. But there is complacency in many of the users, and I am one of the users. Many of us believe that if we comment and if we like, we are becoming activists, but with one like and with our comments, we are changing nothing. A study by Pure Center analyzing many statistics says that those who are related to us in the social media is very similar to the real world. They are very, very similar to us. They share a lot of our opinions. Sometimes we can discuss with some of our friends in the social media, but we are going to be biased because we're going to be with the same group of people, those who think very similarly to us. So, yes, it is something good. It is something useful. It is good to have this medium and to magnify demonstrations and to organize the civil society. But in specific cases, what systems need, like the Mexican system with this type of partially failed democracy, is to supervise on a more ongoing basis and to do it constantly, to supervise government constantly, to found another think tank, the Mexican version. A couple of years ago, there was a lawsuit, there was a demand to have the patrimony, the ownership of the Mexican officials. And if we speak about the finance, we try to analyze the expense at a detailed level, and it is a titanic or giant task. There are many hindrances to analyze the expense in Mexico, and we cannot actually supervise governors. So what does it relate to? Technology and to democratization? It relates to the use of new tools to supervise government. What I said about the declaration or the testimony at the prosecutor's office, it would be great to see this if we could only constantly see what the municipalities do and the different government agencies do with the use of technological tools. And we're going to be able to have better democracy. But analyzing what we see in different places, in all the different states in Mexico, would be impossible. Analysis, processing of big data, processing of large databases that should be available to citizens is something that could help us a lot in order to supervise personal ownership of authorities, public expenses, they exercise, who they are hiring, who is involved in the bidding process. Some research think tank people, if we could work hand by hand with hackers, with civil organizations, with programmers, we could make a change. This is where I see the proposal. This is where I see the more constant and efficient constant when supervising what is happening to governors. And it will have a meaningful effect. And a lot of this has to do with the national digital strategy that was launched a year ago. The operational budget of the national budget is 26 million pesos, and that is not enough. That is not good for anything. And there is no clarity about the goals, the objectives that could be attained in order for the government to give information to the hands of the civil society, and then we would analyze it. I would like to speak about very good actions at the municipal level, like in Zapopan. Zapopan did a revolution in terms of transparency and the use of technology in order to communicate with citizens. And in Mexico City, the Lab for Mexico City, this is another initiative started by the civil society through hackathons, and this is a promotion to use technology for a more efficient government. I would love to see much more in terms of expense supervision and in terms of supervision over the authorities. It is impossible not to tell what is the ownership of politicians who have been elected by people. It is something amazing, and the judiciary said no. That information will be given if the politicians, or in this case congressmen, accept this to happen, and it should apply to everyone. And we also have the Open Government Alliance. They have been working on transparency. But we have a long way to go. We have much more to do. And this is what I wanted to highlight. If this doesn't happen, our likes and our retweets will not be that useful to come to a real democracy. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jose Luis Chicoma, for your arguments. And we're going to be commenting on them, since he is an expert on this subject matter. And we also want to cordially welcome the General Secretary of the Organization of American States, Ambassador Insulza, who is with us. Let's give him a round of applause. Fernando Sumano, would you please take the floor? Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Maria Fernanda Somano, researcher of the International Study Center here at Colegio de Mexico. I would like to start. I would like to make reference to what we mean by, or if we speak about a social movement or social demonstrations, to then try to see how this relates to internet and what is the implication of all this on democracy. I will try to do this in my 8 minutes. And basically, the first thing that I would like to say is that if we speak about social demonstrations, we can think in terms such as a demonstration like yesterday's demonstration, the one done here against these missing students, or to demonstrate in favor of these missing students, what happened in Ayotzinapa, and the reality of Iguala, all the way to social movements, long-lasting movements with effects and with deeper implications. In Latin America, I believe there are many There are some of them very emblematic. For example, the Cochabamba War, the fight of the Cocalero movement in Bolivia, and all that allowed to come to new leadership. This new leadership will have a significant presence in Parliament, and the election of the leader as president of that country. Another example is indigenous people who were disappearing, and at the end of the day, it was the collapse of government and the emergency of the workers, unoccupied workers in Argentina, and mobilizations and demonstrations. Initiatives of the occupations, national lands of the MTST in Brazil, the movements of land workers, farmer mobilizations in Paraguay that also play an important role in the fall of the president. We have the Zapatista movement of 1994 and many other social movements of the last 12 years. And those have been very important mobilizations. The case of Atenco, the case of movement toward peace with justice and dignity led by Cecilia, and more recently the movement I Am 100 movement Yo Soy 132. There are many movements that many times go beyond a one-time demonstration. Now, it is very difficult to think in only one cause for these movements, and in fact there is an explanation for each, but in very general terms, many of them emerge from the response to the detriment in life conditions of many segments of the population. What we've seen in the last 30 years, there are many authors who also speak about the loss of legitimacy and trust on some of the democratic institutions, specifically political parties. And this will take to an important vigorization of the civil society and social movements, and the extreme situation is a collapse of like the one we saw in Venezuela, ecologist movements and human rights. There are some people who say that this could be the product of a value chain, or thinking of materialistic values, and in the case of indigenous movements, it would seem the demand or the reivindication and the demand of the different indigenous peoples to build a plurinational state, a state where they do not only ask for integration and respect, but also the participation in the redefinition and the structuring of all the state. So what would be the impact of internet on the articulation of all these demonstrations and on the articulation of all these movements, which is more or less the title of this session, the title of this panel? I would say there is an uneven impact. There are some elements that I do believe could be generalized. It will reduce information diffusion costs and the summon capacity significantly. Thanks to internet, those costs, it was necessary to summon people in different ways. First, the communication of information. Then it was necessary to come out to the street and get money in order to produce pamphlets or posters or whatever, in order to be able to notify mobilizations and for people to get to know about it. And with the internet, those costs have been significantly reduced. Another important element in which internet has had an effect today, thanks to information that we see in internet, citizens or individuals can know. They can tell who else is going to move, and that is going to have an important impact on the expectations of those citizens. And if they see it is a bigger potential number of people, the one mobilizing, it could somehow give a rise to more participation, because it is thought that a large number of people moving around or mobilizing could have greater pressure. On the other hand, we also have what Jose Luis said. It's something that has to do with internet. Through internet, it could be thought that there is going to be higher demand from citizens to asking for information from government. It could have an effect in accountability and transparency, and it is also one easier way to be in touch with our representatives. Otherwise, it will be more difficult. Traditional mail or trying to meet with the representative of the city hall. So all those will be the positive elements. But where do I see the problems? First, I believe that we should not be that optimistic, and I would agree with the previous speaker, because in the Mexican case, for example, in a recent study that I did, about the special participation, specifically the participation of young people, political participation on internet. What I found is the following. Access to internet in Mexico is pretty limited. There are some households, for example, no more than 30% of access to internet in households in Mexico, and this is the average. But in states such as Guerrero and Chiapas, it is not only 10%. There is another very important bias that has to do with the age. It is clear that it is young people, those who have more knowledge and more capacity to have access to internet. And they are the ones who could use this instrument, something to mobilize or to communicate information. What I also found is that in reality, internet, despite of the fact that we want to somehow give some qualities to it, what I saw is that internet doesn't generate political interest, and it doesn't generate participation. It doesn't generate electoral participation. This is information from the year 2012 for the elections of 2012, and there is no knowledge. It does bring information to young people. This is what internet does. It produces alternative information compared to traditional means, and this could generate new types of participation. But just for those who have access to internet doesn't move groups. It will only give information to those who are already interested in political aspects, but it doesn't generate interest. What it does do is to communicate information, and then the potential participants in political matters and in those matters directly related to the construction of citizenship or a better democracy, they will somehow, when communicating this information, those potential citizens who want to participate, they could have further incentives when they see the number of people who will participate is bigger or higher. But I would repeat this. I would be very cautious. When telling internet has the articulation capacity to articulate a movement or to generate participation per se. To complement all these arguments by our peer in this panel, we should also remember what the mobilization in Tunisia, Egypt, Greece, even in Spain, in the United States, etc., it has had an astonishing impact. These mobilizations were promoted by this phenomenon, which is internet. It is also important to consider this, to remember this. We cordially welcome, we have with us the ambassador of the Organization of American States in Mexico, Mr. Aníbal Quiñones. Welcome, sir. Now it's my pleasure to give the floor over to Kevin Casas. Thank you very much. The relationship between internet and social demonstrations. It has been seen in Latin America. It is a focal point in Latin America and beyond, as he just said. And this is in light of the recent events in Chile, Brazil, Venezuela, and these are only some of the cases in the region. But there has been a very interesting discussion on the role that internet and the social media played when unchaining the Arabic Spring. And this is a discussion that has been based on two assumptions. The first one is that social media unchained demonstrations, and the second one is that internet can release peoples from authoritarian governors. And you should not trust me only. And as Wael Gumin said, he was one of the organizers of the demonstrations against Mubarak in Egypt. And here I quote, "I always said, if you want to set free the society, you only need to give them internet. If you want to have a free society, you should only give internet." End of quote. In reality, this thing is much more complicated, and this is my opinion. In my 8 minutes, I will try to point out 4 points. I will try to speak about the vision. I will be speaking about a more ambiguous opinion of which are the political effects of internet and the social media. The first point I would like to highlight is that internet will not unchain social demonstrations. It will only facilitate social demonstrations. In order to have demonstrations, we should have pre-existing demands and reivindications. And if they are expanded enough and if they are deep enough, and they will generate an explosion with or without internet. Social media are not responsible for the Arabic Spring as a fact, and television. They were not responsible for the collapse of the Berlin Wall or the cassettes with the sermons of the Ayatollah Khomeini. They were not responsible for the collapse of the Ayatollah Khomeini. But the social media, those are tools that will do many important things. As Fernando said, there is going to be a lowering in costs of demonstration organization. Secondly, and I believe this is very important, it allows social mobilization to articulate without visible leaders. And I believe this is key because in the past, despite of the reivindications, it was always necessary to have a leader, someone taking full advantage of the discomfort and unhappiness and articulate it. But now the situation is different. And thirdly, it is possible to socialize the narrative of the discomfort that at the end of the day will make people move. And when I speak about socializing the narrative, I believe that in the case of internet is subject to Marshall McLuhan's remark. The mean is the message. Internet makes possible to have a horizontal politics in which each citizen will become an opinion creator, and those practices by themselves will be important emancipation messages. The second point that I would like to highlight is that internet is not an democratically or inherently a democratic element. It is true that internet can stumble authoritarian regimes, but for each one of these examples, there is another example of how internet can be brutally efficiently used by authoritarians to identify dissidents and to convey propaganda, and dictators and pseudo-dictators are becoming better and better in this. Now that they know this danger, Mubarak, in the case of Mubarak, 80 years old, this took him by surprise, but not in all cases. And it is astonishing to see how easy for governments to block internet contents assisted by technology produced in the democratic West. Internet, in light of what we've seen in recent times, doesn't oppose authoritarian. For internet to oppose authoritarian regimes, there are many variables required for this. In Syria, activists who bet on social media to organize demonstrations in the year 2011 found a regime that was simply willing to use indiscriminately force to stay in power. So there are still many situations. There is still many situations where the guns are more powerful than the keyboard. And even closer from here, what some people love to say when say that internet is going to allow for the Cuban collapse, and if we only allow Cubans to be in the social media, we're going to make the political transformation possible. This is chimera. In the Middle East, there was a critical mass in the northern part of, there was a critical mass but we will not see this in a very long time. So internet is not a necessary force, and it is not enough to guarantee the victory of democracy. The third point that I would like to highlight is that demonstrations facilitated by internet will never substitute traditional political activity, but yes, action parameters will be modified. The demonstrations we see, and this is something that has been mentioned here, those are rebel spasms, moments of rebellion that can express the opposition to something, but they will never articulate a clear political agenda capable of leading to substantive political changes. Think about the people in Spain. It is rather the political forces and the social organized forces, the ones that translate those demands into permanent changes. Those are the ones that take full advantage of the political space started by the demonstrations. In Egypt, for example, the cyber kids organized demonstrations, but those who won the political transaction was the Muslim Brotherhood and the army after them. So it is the lack of a clear agenda, equivalent to failure. But I think this is not the reality, because what demonstrations frequently do is to change parameters of the political discussion to reconfigure the public space. And here there are many cases we're going to speak about. The case of Chile with the educational reform. It was one of the very clear political agendas. But in Chile, demonstrations, and I am sure Monica will be speaking about this, there was an interesting effect, because there was it was the end of the banning of demonstrations. We also have the case of Brazil. Demonstrations were capable of speaking about the political reform to bring it to the political debate and the topic of quality. And in the Middle East, it was only this, but demonstrations were capable of finishing with the perception of no changes in the political order. My fourth point is that internet political activism is the offspring of the representation crisis, but it will not resolve it. It will worsen it. I don't have to insist on the worst opinion of citizenship in all democracies about the traditional mechanisms of the political representation, political parties and Congress, and the very important resistance in young people to get involved in those types of political activity. In light of this, social media are a mirror of activism. If you like one Facebook page, or if you retweet, it is seen as a transformation, but nothing will be transformed. And as we have this activism mirroring, there is going to be a sleeping effect, because it will reduce even less those incentives to get involved in the most traditional ways of political participation, such as organized civil society groups and political parties, which are essential to articulate demands and to make collective decisions. The social media, I believe, will generate a phenomenal activism to speak about the corruption and abuse of power, to control power. But there are many problems to say what to do with power. It has many problems to say this. And as I said before, internet will give a voice, but very frequently that voice cannot be understood. And there is something else that I believe distorts the capacity of internet to become a palliative to this representation crisis. In Latin America, where the use of internet is still limited and it is correlated to the educational level, the social media do not represent the society. It is rather a class bias that we should pay attention to in the political debate. Last but not least, the contribution of the social media to improve quality of public debate. This is pretty doubtful. There are many questions. I confess that I felt thrilled when we start to reduce political debates to 140 character messages, and this without even speaking about impunity. All people will feel like Rambo when they are in front of a keyboard. So on the one hand, we have the contribution of the social media and internet to democracy, which is ambiguous in most of the cases. Summarizing, I believe internet can enrich democracy by facilitating collective actions and citizens' control over power, and to facilitate rebellion spasms, to reconfigure these political spaces, even if there are no clear political agendas. But none of this would be unavoidable. None of this is danger-free. Nothing prevents the use of internet to devastate the quality of the public debate in a democracy. And in light of the recent experience, none of the benefits, real or imagined benefits of the internet political activism will allow us to see what is the most traditional political participation obsolescence, that I am afraid is still the mechanism that will produce long-lasting political changes in a democracy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. A very interesting contribution. And we will comment them later. And it is also a waiver about the strengths and the weaknesses what we have in this new tool that has been called from the Athena Agora to the electronic Agora. This is how one phrase can remove a topic, or how it can call the attention from one government or from one legislator. Very interesting what you said. I would like to now give the floor to the journalist, Monica Gonzalez. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this invitation. I am the director of a research journalism center, which is a non-profitable foundation model that started thanks to internet, because it has only one website, web page, and a web page that makes a lot of noise. I recommend it to you. I came here and I thought I was coming to a country in commotion, and the example we've seen in the last 15 days reveals how internet has failed, because we were told many times that if in dictatorships of the South Cone, when army were assassinating and torturing corpses, with internet many lives would be saved, would have been saved. And I feel that I should say it. Yesterday and today, thanks Jose Luis, we should be stunned, because if we say this is a democratic country, 43 students were just killed, murdered. It was the classical corruption weaving, the one that is eating our countries. And we should not be at ease. We should be mobilized, and we should be with a sense of alert, wondering what to do. And Mexican people could get upset with me, but I don't care, because I love this country. It is not a partially failed democracy. It is something much more serious. It is a country where corrupt people, they pretend this country is a democratic country for no one to say a thing. No one will say anything. Unlike Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Peru, they were harassed by these killing dictatorships. And there were organizations such as the United Nations and the Organization of American States. And what we just had here in Mexico, the assassination of 43 young people, should be something that this is something that should move us. And this is an evidence that internet is a failure. It doesn't save lives. No, I apologize for this, but it is astonishing. It is a mayor. It is a mayor, and he gave them to the drug dealers. How come? No one had a cell phone in the state of Guerrero to film something they took and they calculate, and we do not know how the others were killed. We know nothing. No one filmed a thing. Are they so coward? Are they that afraid? It is terrible. And this, then we wonder, why is internet for? I remember when the television was first created, we were told, the radio is over. The radio is died. It's dead. Today, internet is emerging, and the radio is still alive, stronger than ever in all the different countries affected by misery, poverty, by lack of education, and by lack of expectations. Despite of the fact that for the last 10 years we have had no dictatorships, and the map changed completely. The big problem we have is the redistribution of income. Banks have never won more than now. Something is not working. Yes, I love this morning's panels, and congratulations, because they brought us to the real setting. How many citizens have internet in our countries? But I believe we're going to be overwhelmed by figures, because that is not the core of this session. The core is that very poor people and younger people they want to be loved, they want to have access, they are full of expectations, they want to have access to life, and sometimes they feel pretty upset and they just say things. Is that internet? No, that is not internet. Internet is much more than that. So I believe we have to analyze this, and not only use Twitter and Facebook. We have to analyze what does internet allow, what does internet affect. And in this context, where there has been a reduction in extreme poverty, and this is a product of the public policies. And as we said this morning we were speaking about the reduction in millions in Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Peru, but we should not forget something. The extreme poverty has one defect, one flaw, and a topic. And those who do public policies know it is a pendulum type of poverty. In other words, anytime, in any movement, in any natural catastrophe, and by the way, we have many, we will be back to extreme poverty. These are not numbers that should make us happy, because here we have a pending point. Now let's speak about public policies. Let's speak about what we were saying this morning. Internet is treating us as consumers, as clients, and the system, policy, banks, institutions treat us as consumers. I remember one of the things that I like about Ricardo Lagos when he was the president of Chile. He said, I want to transform consumers. I want them to become citizens. And I believe this is a challenge that is still pending. We are not clients. We are all citizens. And as soon as we learn how to use the mechanisms we have to make our rights perfect, to have a voice and to give a voice to those who are invisible, that day is when these mechanisms will be ours. We will have this sense of ownership. But we need to have more knowledge to take ownership over them. And we have another core topic. And unfortunately, internet, as all global things, is also ownership of others. And there are some people making money in Twitter and they are doing advertising, undercover advertising, and there are others using internet to communicate and to give false information that only tries to destroy politicians, decent journalists, the honor of people, always disguised and covered and being anonymous. So I would like to say that we are in an area where internet is only the most important challenge. It is one more component of the most important challenge we currently face in Latin America. What to do in order to take a step further, in order to have deeper democracy and to transform these structures. For example, in the state of Guerrero, I think that this is like a theater. Everything works. People come into the city hall, people will come into the court, they will come in and out, they will talk to judges, they will be talking to the police forces, but everything is false, everything is fake. It is only one scenario for a play, because in reality all that has been created by organized crime and by corrupt politicians, and for all of us to believe it works. For all of us not to think that there is total power by those who want to subdue us, for us to think there is still a space for justice, when the truth of the matter, that impunity is what actually prevails. And this is exactly what we see in internet. Because unfortunately, the control that our democracy requires is the following. Our democracy requires knowledge. Our democracy requires education and political will and some courage. What do we do with that? It is not internet. Let's demystify internet, but we should also take position over good things, and we need to let others see what the risks. And one of the good things about internet is that internet as such, and the source, because internet is not internet. There are some sources that would allow us to get information, to have control over public policies. I will give you an example. A good journalist site it will upload information about interests and ownership, even if parliament people do not want this to be published. And this is what we did in Chile. And it was wonderful, because now people can see and wonder, this person is lying. I know that he's her corporation, or the person could say, this person is lying because his spouse has a very wealthy corporation, and her corporation is even wealthier than what he says. In other words, online supervision is not Twitter. It is understanding that there are some websites where transparency, and this is where we have the most important information. The core of all this is how internet facilitates transparency, and transparency is what would allow all of us to come in and control. But we are being controlled as well. But this would allow for transparency. To be in those places where the corrupt power could be present. This morning we were speaking about the voids left by the state. I would like to say that the main void will never be in the public debate, or the gap. It is not the power that the drug traffickers have. No, it is not that power. And speaking about the educational reform in Chile, started by the Penguins in 2006, and then that one continued in 2011. Obviously, as others have said, and I will not repeat this, mobilizations were wonderful, because Facebook and Twitter help a great deal for that. Internet is internet, but the other one, where there is a space, where there are zones that will report, that will notify, well, they shredded up everything. They shredded all the information up, and then students understood what was the meaning of privatization of higher education in Chile, how much of the banks were making with the state loans, how many unlawful profits obtained by the large economic groups when entering into this business of education that has been the most profitable one in the last 10 years. To break down on this information, we want people to know why there is a sense of urgency when doing public policies to finish with the corruption, with the errors, with the profits of only a few people. Because there are hundreds of people who are dreaming, and they dream one person will be able to make it to the university, to be able to say, this is enough to those who destroy the dreams of hundreds of families. That is not a minor enterprise. And if we have good internet, we can make this happen. So if you think that other internet allows for transparency, and if it allows to document, and if it allows to ameliorate anger, because if I know who I am fighting with, I will not be destroying the glass stores. I will not be a vandal. I know where I need to channel my anger, and this is contributing to democracy. And then I will conclude by saying, what is the debate we are missing? Something that we could do in internet. Nowadays, corruption niches are not precisely those laws that do not exist, and not the power that has been replaced, that has been taken by drug traffickers, and sometimes by the pharmaceutical labs when they behave as drug trafficker cartels, because they all come to an agreement to implement some policies that will damage citizens, or like in Chile, where chicken producers come to an agreement. They do not use internet to do the pricing and to damage a lot of citizens. We have law or legislations or laws full of laws. There are some laws which were made with negligence, with omissions. That is a reality for corrupt people to come in. We were speaking about patronage. Patronage and internet are closely linked and related. I didn't want to speak about the situation we have because we all know it. If we know internet is not only gold, it's not only raw material, and it is not only getting free, it is one more tool. It is one more tool. Because, as always, the main material is us, citizens. When we can ask for transparency, to know who has the obligation to make it efficient and effective. Last but not least, I would like to say that the biggest challenge is the challenge governments have, because they do not like transparency. They like secret information, whether they are democratic or dictatorships. They love secrets. They don't like to be surveilled. They don't like that people know how it is that they signed documents, and also journalism. And we are facing a crisis. Good journalism, where the crisis of the journalism business model has failed. And good journalism is the one that will tell citizens. Good journalism is the one that oversights, is the one with ethics. It has commitment with good democracy and with a good practice. And it is not the patronage system. This is the journalism, the one that citizens should be asking for. And if citizens do not ask for this journalism, then we're going to have a bigger crisis, because citizens without good journalism will be blind, they will be deaf, and they will be mute, despite of their cell phones. despite of the computers and despite of the progress in Latin America, to have internet. Thanks, Monica Gonzalez, for her brilliant presentation. And I am being notified that we have only 20 more minutes. So we have time to answer 2 or 3 questions. Would you like to choose the ones you want to answer? Very shortly. We will not have time. We have many questions, which is good. Here I have a very interesting one that has to do with the panel. When a social demonstration is judicialized, what is the repercussion of this in the democratic process? In 2013, in Mexico City, there were 7,910 demonstrations and 250,000 police officers were needed. And Mexico City's government spent almost 11 million pesos in fences. This is to regulate social demonstrations. Mexico is not Sweden. What about Sweden or Switzerland, where maybe the regulation of demonstration could be properly managed between the authorities and the civil society, but in a country with very weak institutions, if the authority is given the power to regulate demonstrations, it could be very dangerous. And I am always tired to read in the journals when many people say the right to mobility, or how many millions are spent by not only Mexico City's government, but how much businesses lose where demonstrations go by. But we only have to think about the right to speak, the right to voice, but in this case, in this country with very weak institutions, sometimes that right to speak is more important. In some years it could be different, but today this is a cost that we need to pay in order to have a more democratic country. Would you please choose one of the questions? Only one question, because there is no more time. I think this summarizes the panel. Does it impact democracy? With this panel, the answer would be not necessarily. There's going to be impact when there are resources for organization, where citizens are interested beyond the personal interest, when citizens get interested in the community problems. And I insist, when there are organizational resources, whenever there are specific demands. I would like to end by saying that there was a very interesting survey about the public opinion on victimization, and it makes reference to what Monica Gonzalez said. In that survey, what we saw is that we see violence far away here in Mexico. Unless we have been victims, we see victims and we think victims, we sometimes think victims are responsible for the things that happen to them, and people say it is only the criminals, the ones who kill each other. But we do not know. We are not interested in supporting a victim organization. So I do believe that if we do not have this awareness, and as Monica said, look what happened to these 43 students. And yes, we see internet having no effect, because, I repeat, there is no awareness, there is no consciousness, there is no rational, and if there is not a concern towards the problems of others, I see no way for internet to have a direct impact in democracies or on democracies. Thanks for your questions. I have one by Álvaro Herrera. He says, do you think a manipulation in the social media through false accounts will have a negative effect on social demonstrations? Could be. I think with this question we can speak about a very interesting topic. As I spoke about authoritarian governments using internet, brutal cases of internet use within the frame of a democracy, organized political forces also learn how to play internet games, and they learn how to interrupt and disrupt many of the things that happen in the social media and use them for their own benefit. One way of seeing this is false accounts, but here the issue is that when you have this notion that internet is an autonomous expression space for citizens, for citizenship, giving rise to this new agora. Be careful, because others are also playing, and the forces play for good and for bad in that agora. So that freshness and that spontaneity could be less clear than what some people might think. Here we read, social media and new virtual means or media. There is no name in this question. Social media and new virtual media give rise to new spaces. And internet is something controlled and with filters. How come regular citizens can use the social media and to be benefited? I think what we've seen recently is that the regimes which are placing padlocks or lock pads in the content of internet are only a few in general terms, and those are pretty identifiable. There may be some biases in internet, how internet is used in a democratic society. There are biases, as we have biases in the traditional media. I believe internet, one of the good things of internet is that it allows for a pluralist behavior, when in fact there is a possibility to use it freely. So I don't think this can be justified. Internet is full of lock paths that do not allow for freedom of speech of people. I am more optimistic. I do believe there is a space for freedom of speech in the use of internet. Certainly in most and practically all Latin American countries. How can regular citizens can use the social media in that context? Well, by speaking out, and remember that the transformation power on the reality after speaking out, it is a limited effect. And we have to understand that the transformation of the political system, the transformation of the society in one direction, any direction, it needs much more, and it requires not to abandon the traditional political participation modes. And according to my opinion, this is still essential. This is critical. Last but not least, I have a comment, and it is a very nice comment by Maria Victoria, very kind comment by Maria Victoria Valencia. I think this is the last time. I like your thought, because it is a language that we are starting to learn, and we need to have more knowledge and experience, and we need to be able to tell what extent we can evolve. Internet will come to where people want internet to be. So we need to have a clearer vision, less idealistic, less idealism. And I insist on this. Let's do not dismiss, let's do not pay attention to the traditional political participation and representation modes, mechanisms. I believe this could be, this is bad, and I do not clearly know how to reverse this misconception. Each time I say we have to strengthen the political parties, each time I say we have to strengthen the political representation in Congress, we need more people, young people getting involved in politics. There is an echo that rebounds in my ear, and it tells me that we've been saying this for the last 20 years and we haven't come to further results. Because if you see the regional surveys, opinion of people about Congress and about political parties, the opinion is worst. So are we hitting something that is already dead? We need to keep on saying it. We need to keep on saying it. And if we have no replacement, and internet, I believe internet doesn't replace this, but we need to keep on making the same warning. It is essential for a robust democracy. Thank you very much. And now we will give the floor to Monica Gonzalez. At the end of her participation, I will try to come to a balance because we have a question. The topic of our panel is condensed, is summarized in only one question. Does it improve democracy? Does it strengthen democracy? Yes, but for that we have to, as we do with the rest of the tools available to human beings. And this is not the panacea. This is not a miracle of nature. It is only one tool, and we should not get overwhelmed by it. We need to know how to use this tool, but we should also know how to read, and this is very difficult because it is very easy to get drunk by this. But first I would like to answer a question and making reference to what my colleague just said. What my Mexican colleague said was thrilling. And it is overwhelming for some of us Latin American people. Subversive criminals. That person was a terrorist. In Mexico, there are no assassinations of journalists out of more than 60. And there are many people. There are a lot of people given a drug sack. Do you see the punishment? It is not only me getting killed for fighting. This is something that will damage a lot of people. This is pretty perverse. This is pretty evil. People are mean when blaming others, and this is why they need to be. This is to be fought. This is something we need to go against. So this is very old, and dictatorships have always said that those who are killed are criminals, are terrible people. And there is a reason to say that. There is always a phrase. And phrases say, I'm sure they were doing something. They were doing something evil. That's why you, my friend, or you, my daughter, my kid, do not intervene. So let them kill, let them privatize our natural resources. But you stay home. If you have time, you can make love. After you watch the TV, of course. And since we are all kind of pretty afraid, fear will paralyze all muscles. So we are facing a complex situation. We need to fight this, and only one final phrase on this. In Mexico, there are more than 60,000 people who die since the beginning of the war. In Calderón administration, more people who have died, more than all the dictatorships that we have in the South Cone. Who has ever said that there is a dictatorship? Who has ever said we cannot allow this to happen? I mean, it's beautiful. And now it hurts. I organize workshops for Mexican journalists. And the other day I heard something that made me cry. I was with some journalists, and one of them told me, you know something, I am not afraid of disappearing. You know what is my fear? I don't want to be burned with acid and to never be found. That is my fear. That is a reality. So let's also think about the following. And only one more question, because I will get pretty emotional. What happens to young people with the internet? You know what happens to them? The career for life. We have not forgotten. Love is very important, and I agree with my friends from this panel. The serious problem is a representation crisis, because it is not that in the past priests were not pedophiles, but now there is more information. It is not that in the past men love to be with girls, but the issue is that now it is something known. It is not that there was less corruption. There was much more corruption, but now we know it, and this is what matters. We need to assume it. We need to understand it. We need to use it. But this will also provoke a huge criticism. They need a sense of ownership. There are some clubs, networks that would give us the sense of ownership. I do not agree with you. Let's create methods. This morning, someone said that there is a need to come out to the street in Latin America, but I'd say, no, we need to go out in Spain, in France, in Latin America, in all countries. Nothing will replace the street for politicians and for journalists. Nothing will replace the street. Those journalists who stay home, and if they only use internet, they will be very cold people who know nothing about how the street is. Nothing will replace the street. So there is a sense of ownership. We need to produce a sense of ownership, and it should be a real thing. This is why this is a big challenge. Are we in danger? Yes, because democracy as we know it, democracy as a participation, as a supervision, as integration, as public policies, this needs to have new practices. I am sure we have not moved. And young people are immersed in a new world. We would like to thank, we would love to listen to these opinions. All members of this panel, you were very spontaneous, you were very candid, very open, you were very sincere. And it is possible to come to a conclusion. And there are two-head opinions, and there are some positive aspects that we will see in internet. There are other aspects that run this risk, take this risk. If they are deregulated, if they are not controlled, because this would affect the freedom of speech, which is recognized right. The exercise that you have given to us, your exercise was very, very healthy. Because there is something that Kevin said. This is a mystery. So we need to think in terms of all these tools. We need to bring them to the adequate setting, because I do believe, and this is the end of my presentation, I believe it is an irreversible process. I believe will not stop. It will get refined. It will get sophisticated. We're going to have more elaborated technologies. We are going to have things more adapted to the progress of the globalized world. I would like to express my gratitude for listening to us. and to all the members of this panel for your very brilliant participation. Thank you very much. We will have a 5-minute break. We will have only a 5-minute break. Here we have the General Secretary of the Organization of American States and the moderator. We will only change our presidium and we will start.